In a quiet town surrounded by fields and narrow streets, there lived a boy named Steve. He was an ordinary student with average grades and simple dreams. But what made him different was his gentle nature. Steve believed that even the smallest act of kindness could make a difference. Every day he walked to school, he noticed things that others ignored: the tired faces of workers, the silence of lonely people, and the struggle hidden behind ordinary lives. On his way to school, Steve passed an old man who sat outside a small, worn out house. The man rarely spoke to anyone, and most people assumed he didn't want company. Children often avoided him, and adults walked past without a second glance. But Steve, without knowing why, felt that the man needed someone. So, every morning he would stop, smile, and say, "Good morning." At first, the old man didn't respond, but Steve continued anyway, never expecting anything in return. Days turned into weeks, and slowly the old man began to acknowledge him, first with a slight nod, then a faint smile, and eventually with a quiet good morning in return. It wasn't big change, but for Steve, it meant everything. He realized that kindness doesn't always create instant results, but when given patiently, it can soften even the hardest hearts. At school, Steve was known as a calm and helpful student, though not particularly popular. One day, a new boy named Paul joined the class. His clothes were worn and his eyes reflected nervousness. As soon as he entered, whispers filled the room. Some students laughed quietly, while others avoided sitting near him. Paul walked to last bench and sat alone, trying to disappear. Steve noticed this immediately. During lunch break, while others gathered in groups, he walked over to Paul and sat beside him. "Hi, I'm Steve," he said warmly. Paul looked confused and asked why he chose to sit with him. Steve simply replied, "Because no one should sit alone." That simple sentence carried more comfort than any long speech could. From that day on, Steve made sure Paul never felt invisible. He shared his lunch, helped him understand lessons, and encouraged him to participate in class. At first, other students mocked Steve for befriending someone they considered different, but Steve didn't let their opinions change his behavior. He believed that kindness should not depend on approval from others. As days passed, Paul slowly began to open up. He started answering questions in the class and even smiled more often. One day, during a difficult math lesson, the teacher asked a question that no one could answer. The classroom fell silent until Paul raised his hand and gave the correct solution. Everyone was surprised. The same boy they had ignored was actually very intelligent. From that moment, their attitude toward him began to change. Meanwhile, Steve continued to greet the old man every morning. One cold day, he noticed the old man was shivering. Without any hesitation, he removed his sweater and handed it to him. The old man tried to refuse, but Steve insisted. "You need it more than I do," he said with a smile. That day, Steve went to school feeling cold, but his heart felt warm. The next morning, something unexpected happened. The old man was not outside his house. Instead, a car stood nearby, and a well dressed man approached Steve. He introduced him as Old Man's grandson and explained that his grandfather had been lonely for years after losing his family. He had stopped talking to people, but Steve's daily greetings had slowly brought him back to life. You didn't just greet him, the man said. You gave him hope again. Steve felt shy hearing this. To him, it was just a simple habit, not something extraordinary. But that moment made him realize that kindness often has effect we cannot see. Even the smallest actions can reach deep into someone's life and create meaningful change. A few weeks later, the school announced a special award for the student who demonstrated strong character and positive influence. Many students expected the highest scorer to win. However, when the principal announced Steve's name, the entire hall was silent with surprise. Steve himself was confused as he walked to the stage. The principal explained that true success is not only measured by grades, but also by how a person treats others. Steve's kindness towards both Paul and the old man had not gone unnoticed. His actions had changed lives and inspired others. As Steve looked around, he saw his classmates clapping for him, including those who had once laughed at him. That moment taught everyone an important lesson. Kindness is not about recognition or reward, it is about making someone's life a little easier, a little brighter. It does not require wealth or talent, only a sincere heart and the courage to care. Years later, Steve grew up to become a teacher. He carried the same values with him and shared them with his students. On the wall of his classroom, he wrote a simple line: Be kind, even when no one is watching. Whenever students asked why kindness mattered to so much, he would tell them that the smallest act of kindness can leave the biggest impact. In the end, Steve's story reminds us that kindness is powerful in its simplicity. It can turn loneliness into companionship, fear into confidence, and silence into hope. The world may not always notice kind people immediately, but their actions create ripples that travel far beyond what they can imagine.